Headliner Nation, what's up, my peeps? Week 11, we've got some wide receivers that we need to talk about to get you ready to set your lineups this week. That's right, we got our start and sit episode here back on the Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully all of you are doing well today. We're going to jump into all the information here in just a second. But of course, as we do every week, we got to take a look at those accuracy ratings. So let's pop it up on the screen. Take a look at how we did last week. For wide receivers, 62% last week. Not good enough. Not good enough. We want to be over 70% every single week. That is my goal. Obviously, for the hits there, Marvin Jones Jr., Juju Smith-Schuster, Travis Fulgham, who I listed as a sit, were all hits for me. For the misses, MVS, Cole Beasley, DJ Moore. Then, of course, a lot of you also know Diontae Johnson and T. Higgins were last-minute changes for me. Hopefully, we don't have any weather concerns this week. I mean, Diontae Johnson and T. Higgins were both starts for me until about an hour before game time because the weather said that in Pittsburgh, the wind gusts were supposed to be 55 miles per hour or worse, and then it was supposed to be a sustained wind of anywhere between like 30 and 35 miles per hour. Come game time, wind gusts were only around 35 and sustained wind was like 15 to 25. So that's a really big difference. And the reason that I took a look at Higgins and Johnson and moved them into the sit column was because they seem to be the deep threat. But if you watch the game, there was no issues going down the field because the wind wasn't as bad as what was reported in the morning. But hey, weathermen are going to miss just like I'm going to miss. And it's over and it's done with. And there's nothing that we can do about it. So let's go ahead and move on. Our first matchup of the week, a big one on Thursday Night Football. Arizona and Seattle on Thursday Night Football. This is going to be one heck of a matchup. Really looking forward to watching this. We're going to be going with DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk as a sit. As a start. DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk as a start. Fitzgerald and Isabella as sits. Right now, Seattle's giving up the most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. We know that. We've talked about that in the past. They still haven't gotten any better at stopping the pass. And Christian Kirk, since week 5, is the wide receiver 10. You want to know who the wide receiver 9 is since week 5? That would be Mr. DeAndre Hopkins himself. So since week 5, DeAndre Hopkins has lost a little bit to Christian Kirk. But hey, when you've got the wide receiver 9 and wide receiver 10 over the last several weeks, you play those guys in huge matchups like this one. So we're going to have both of these guys listed as starts. Kirk has been a start for me for the last few weeks. He's been a little bit lower on the top 30, but this week he's going to be much higher on the top 30 because this is a great matchup for him. For Seattle, DK Metcalf, we're going to be locking him in. A tough matchup last week. Jalen Ramsey did end up covering him. A couple of days before the game, Jalen Ramsey said, well, I'm not going to be covering DK Metcalf, and then he did end up covering DK Metcalf. So they were messing with us there a little bit. Tyler Lockett's going to be a start, okay? Right now, though, over the last 3 weeks, he's the wide receiver 55. But there's nothing that we can do about that because we already know with Tyler Lockett, the dude can absolutely just break off a banger and help you win your week just because of that performance. Are you really going to sit Tyler Lockett? I don't see how you can, and I wouldn't. He is still 7th in the league in targets. So he's getting the looks from Russell Wilson. It's just about turning in those more consistent performances. Hopefully, you have somebody on your team that's a more established, a more consistent wide receiver 1 to help you through these times. But DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they're both going to be starts for me. And a matchup on Thursday Night Football that honestly is probably going to hit the over and be one heck of a matchup to watch. The Cincinnati Bengals and the Washington Football Team. For Cincinnati, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, we're getting both of those guys on the field this week. They're both going to be starts for me. Again, last week, T. Higgins was a start until about an hour before game time when I saw the weather report for that afternoon game. This week, set it and forget it. We're not going to move T. Higgins regardless of what the weather tries to tell us. For Boyd and Higgins, for T. Higgins, I've been saying it for a while now. I saw some of you comment and say, well, Higgins is an absolute must start. I've been saying for weeks that we're starting Higgins. In fact, if you look back through my videos, Higgins has been a start for me for several weeks now. If you toss out week 1, he's 11th in yards and he's top 10 in yards yards per target and yards per reception. So yeah, he's getting those deep plays. And again, that's what's kind of led me to sit him last week when I saw the weather, because I thought his performance in gusty winds would have been hurt more than what Tyler Boyd's would have been. But again, we're rolling with him as a start this week. Let's set it and forget it. We're not even going to pay attention to the weather in the morning. Not going to let that change any of our thought process. For the Washington football team, Terry McLaurin is going to be a start for me. Is there a more underrated wide receiver one in the league right now? The dude is a wide receiver one, and I just don't understand why he's not talked about more often than what he is. Cincinnati does allow 40-plus fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Now, this would be a great matchup for Terry McLaurin and possibly another wide receiver on this team. However, there are so many targets going to J.D. McKissic right now, it is hard for us to target another wide receiver. I mean, it was Isaiah Wright last week, kind of that wide receiver too. We've seen Dontrell Inman be that wide receiver too. Cam Sims has had a big week. Steven Sims has come back. So it's hard for me to say, yeah, this is the guy really that we're going to pinpoint every single week, because it could be a different guy every single week. We know Terry McLaurin is going to be that number one target. J.D. McKissic and Antonio Gibson as the running backs are kind of that number two target right now. And then even Logan Thomas, who we'll talk about in the tight end video, is that number three. So really what we look at for a wide receiver two for Washington is who has the most upside any given week, because right now trying to target consistency in that position, it's just not worth it. After a bye last week, Atlanta will get back on the field against New Orleans. We're back to starting Julio Jones, and we're going to have Calvin Ridley as a start right now, but we got to keep an eye on it. As of this recording, Calvin Ridley hasn't practiced in full. He's done some warm-ups, and then he's kind of watched from the sideline. So we really don't know what the rest of the week is going to bring with that foot injury that he had a couple of weeks ago. So again, keep an eye on that as the week progresses. We may have to change that if we get closer to the game time and he still isn't practicing. So Russell Gage and Olamide Zaccheaus right now are both going to be sits for me. The thing for me with the wide receivers right now is Jameis going to keep it close? I mean, that's the biggest thing. If Jameis comes out and is the Jameis of last year, yeah, he's going to have some turnovers, but he's still going to work the ball down the field. He is going to put up some yards. He's going to put up some touchdowns. That's good for New Orleans in a fantasy sense, because that means that these guys here are going to continue to get looks throughout the game. If for some reason Jameis just isn't getting it done and Atlanta is getting up early and often on New Orleans, then Todd Gurley and Brian Hill, we could see a lot more of them as the game goes on. But as of right now, Jones and Ridley are definitely going to be starts for me. On the opposite end for New Orleans, Michael Thomas is going to be a start, okay? Because this is either going to be a disaster or it's going to be worth it for New Orleans wide receivers this week. I'm going to sit Emmanuel Sanders this week, and I'm going to go with Tre'Quan Smith instead. Because if you look at what Jameis Winston has had over the last couple of years, he's got Mike Thomas, who can work deep down the field, and he's got Chris Godwin, who can really work some of those slants and things over the middle of the field. That's kind of what I see with Michael Thomas and Tre'Quan Smith here. Michael Thomas is not your drive the ball down the field type of wide receiver. He can, but we know that Michael Thomas is known for his route running in the intermediate portions of the field. So to me, that's that Chris Godwin type role that Jameis Winston has had the last couple of years. So who's the guy that's going to push the ball down the field? To me, that's not Emmanuel Sanders, that's Tre'Quan Smith. And couple that with the fact that if New Orleans gets down early in this game, they're going to have to work the ball down the field even more. Tre'Quan Smith is a start for me this week. I'm feeling that type of play that we've seen from Jameis Winston over the last couple of years. Tre'Quan Smith seems to fit that style a little bit more. So this week, we're going to go with Michael Thomas. We're going to go with Tre'Quan Smith. We're going to sit the other guys, and we're going to hope that Jameis Winston just doesn't suck. Pittsburgh and Jacksonville. And hey, Jacksonville, they've been hanging around a little bit with some of their opponents. Can they do the same thing this week with the unbeaten Pittsburgh Steelers? We'll have to wait and see. For the wide receivers, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, we're going to start them, all three of them, probably moving forward at this point. Okay, we see now that there's enough volume for the three of them to go around. But here's the thing. Like I said, I am good with starting all three of them in good matchups. Juju is likely going to be the safest wide receiver moving forward. Deontay Johnson is going to have your highest upside every single week. Chase Claypool is going to be the most volatile, though. Chase Claypool is going to have the lowest floor and the highest ceiling. Juju's floor is going to be a little bit higher than Deontay Johnson's, but his ceiling is going to be a little bit lower. And Johnson's floor is going to be a little bit lower, but his ceiling is going to be higher than Juju. So that's the way these guys break down. Now, for this week, Jacksonville allows the highest yards after catch in the league, and they allow the highest average yards gained on completions. That right there spells absolute disaster for them and big-time plays on your fantasy team for Claypool, Johnson, and Juju. Okay, so for Jacksonville, what are we doing with Jacksonville? Well, for Jacksonville, we've got two wide receivers that starts this week, DJ Chark and Keelan Cole. Because even though Pittsburgh defense, it's pretty good. They get a lot of pressure, lead the league in sacks. They're a very good football team. Obviously, their record shows it. But they do tend to give up some big plays. Their average depth of target is 9.6 yards. That is highest in the league. And they also are second highest in the league in yards per completion at 12.4 yards. So, again, this defense tends to get eaten up on some big plays. They don't give up a ton of volume, but they give up some big chunks. And for DJ Chark and Keelan Cole, that could be just enough this week to put up fantasy viable numbers. What's going on, New England? I see you there. I see you putting up some performances, dealing with the injuries and everything. You're still trying to compete. But hey, you get Houston this week, so you've got yourself another shot. For the wide receivers in New England, Jakobi Meyers is going to be our only start for us this week. He's been the wide receiver 7 the last 3 weeks, and during that time, he's been tied for third in targets. So you know what that means? That makes Jakobi Meyers our Manscaped must-start of the week here in Week 11. That's right, Manscaped.com. If you head over there and you need anything to help you out with your grooming purposes, Manscaped.com is the way to go. If you use code word headliners, all capital letters, not only are you going to get 20% off all of their fine products, but you're going to get free shipping as well. So Manscaped.com, code word headliners, all capital letters, and get yourself some manscaping tools that you need. So Jakobi Meyers is going to be my Manscaped must start of the week, going up against Houston, who gives up a lot of points to wide receivers as well. And he's the only guy right now. An interesting fact about N'Keal Harry, he played 60% of the snaps last week. He got no targets. Either N'Keal Harry is going to be one of the biggest busts of basically the last 10 years or so, or he's going to get things turned around here maybe next year. But for this year, it's a no-go for me. For Houston, going up against New England, tough matchup. It is a tough matchup. The New England D has been very good this year, and I'm quite surprised. For as many starters as they lost coming into the season, their defense has still been pretty good. But there are still chances at big plays for these two guys, and Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. And that's why I'm going to list them both as starts. Because for me, Deshaun Watson is going to find these guys throughout the game. And all it takes is really one big play. And we saw it a couple of weeks ago with the Jets. Brashard Perriman took advantage of a couple of big plays. One of them, the cornerback, did fall down. So we won't hold that against him too much. But Cooks and Fuller are really the same thing. If they can take advantage of a big play here or there, then there might be just enough volume, just enough to be able to keep up the fantasy statistics for you and be starts for this week. Philadelphia and Cleveland, this is going to be a matchup that's going to be ripe for the picking with these wide receivers. So for Philadelphia, to kick it off, Jalen Reagor is going to be a start for me. And I will go back to listing Travis Fulgham as a start this week. So for last week, I had him listed as a sit. A lot of the reasons I gave to you guys came to fruition. Okay. The one thing I will say, he didn't see Bradbury as much as I thought. But that makes things even worse, because that doesn't necessarily mean that Fulgham was locked down by Bradbury the entire time. Just means he wasn't looked at. So maybe they go back to taking a look at him this week in a much better matchup. Again, Cleveland allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Fulgham's matchup is much better this week than it was last week. So I'm going to give him another shot. I'm not going to move on quite yet. This team is getting healthy, which makes all the difference, because when Travis Fulgham was putting up numbers, he was really the only guy. This team is now healthy. Jalen Reagor, to me, is still the wide receiver one on this team. You put Fulgham on the outside. You put Alshon Jeffrey on the other side. You can play Jalen Reagor in the slot. You can move him outside every once in a while. The guy's a mismatch nightmare. He's going to continue to put up stats for Philadelphia. On the other side, for Cleveland, I've got all of these wide receivers listed as sits this week. Why? Because I think we're going to see a whole lot of Chubb, the running back. That's who we're going to see. The running back. We're going to see a whole lot of Kareem Hunt. And I think in this matchup, we're going to see some Austin Hooper. The wide receivers on this offense over the last few weeks, and really for the entire season so far, outside of OBJ when he had a couple of big performances, there's no ceiling to these guys right now. And because of that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to list them as starts. Because again, my cutoff is 10 half PPR points. Jarvis Landry, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Rashard Higgins, none of those guys are hitting those 10 fantasy points right now in half PPR formats. So it does me no good to list them as starts. Now, if you're desperate, if you need a wide receiver 3, whatever it may be, I still think you could throw Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins into your lineup and get a few points. You're not going to get left with a blank more than likely. But again, the ceiling just hasn't been there because of how much they run the football. And I believe now in this matchup, being such a good matchup for Austin Hooper, it's going to leave the wide receivers out to dry this week. Detroit and Carolina, and we're all hoping that Kenny Golladay will get back sooner rather than later, and I just don't see it this week. I'm going to tag him with the injured out doubtful tag. He could potentially be ready, but again, I am not banking on it right now. So Marvin Jones, just like he has been the last few weeks, he's going to be a start for me again this week. He's got 4 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks, and this is a tough matchup for him. But he has also performed well against Indianapolis. That was a tough matchup. And against Washington, that was a tough matchup. The guy right now is scoring touchdowns. Matthew Stafford, I think, is going to be just fine. I saw that someone thought that it wasn't looking good for him this week, and I don't believe that for a second. So for me this week, Marvin Jones is definitely going to be a start, while the other guys are going to be sits. For Carolina, we'll run with DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson as starts this week, and no Curtis Samuel. But I'm keeping an eye on Teddy Bridgewater. As of right now, the injury is considered to be minor. It's a minor MCL sprain. Is that going to be true, though? Will he start on Sunday? I don't know. We have to keep an eye on it. Detroit does not do a good job of creating turnovers through the air. Okay, so I'm not worried about DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson this week. Sometimes they don't give up a ton of volume, but they do give up big chunk plays. And we know with DJ Moore, basically his climb back to being fantasy viable, he's kind of like Tyler Lockett right now. Okay, he's going to have some big performances, but he's kind of dependent on some of those big plays to kind of help get you there. And that's what we've seen from DJ Moore over the last few weeks. He needs those big plays. He could get those against Detroit this week, but we got to see if Teddy Bridgewater is going to be healthy. Baltimore's coming off a bad beat to the Patriots. Tennessee hasn't been playing that well these last few weeks. Both of these teams got to get back in the driver's seat, but they're going to have to face each other to do it this week. For Tennessee, Corey Davis is going to be a sit because Baltimore is only allowing 31 fantasy points a game to opposing wide receivers. 5th fewest in the NFL. But we have to go with A.J. Brown as a star because the big play is always there for him. But that's part of the danger as well. If you look at it this season, if you look at any performances where he had multiple catches, the games in which he's a guy that we're like, yes, set him in here, A.J. Brown, stud, he's averaging well over 10 yards per reception. In the games that he's not having fantasy-worthy performances, he's averaging less than that. So still, as I talked about this offseason, A.J. Brown's a little too dependent on the big play for me. But that big play can hit at any time. And even in a tough matchup against Baltimore, I'm willing to start him because of how close he is to those big plays every single week. Adam Humphries still in the concussion protocol. Moving over to Baltimore, Tennessee allows quite a bit of fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So somebody's probably going to hit this week. Are you willing to bet on who that might be? It could be Marquise Brown. It could be Willie Snead. People are asking about Willie Snead right now. But over the last 2 games that he's had, so 2 of the last 3 games have been basically fantasy-worthy performances. However, those have been against teams that have an issue stopping players in the slot. Tennessee isn't that great, but they don't necessarily have an issue stopping players in the slot either. So is it really going to be Willie Snead again this week? With Baltimore, it's too difficult to call these wide receivers on a weekly basis because of how inconsistent Lamar Jackson has been so far this season. So for right now, all these guys are going to be sits for me. Marquise Brown, I think he's the guy with the highest upside. So if you're looking for a dart throw, somebody that you hope can perform, Marquise Brown would be the guy that I would put in your lineup this week. The Jets and the Chargers, both of these teams, well, I was going to say they're underperforming. Maybe the Chargers are underperforming. The Jets are performing exactly how some of us expected. That would be me that predicted them to only have one win this year, and I got lit up by Jets fans. Anyway, neither here nor there. For the Jets this week, Jamison Crowder is going to be my only start. Brashad Perriman's coming off a big game against the Patriots, but one of those plays, the cornerback fell down. So the game wouldn't have been nearly as big if it weren't for that. And again, for like Denzel Mims, like I got to see some more consistency from him. I got to see some more consistency from Perriman. Perriman is a guy I talked about a few weeks ago, like on the waiver wire video to grab is kind of a shot in the dark over the last few weeks. So there's still some opportunities for him, but LAC does give up the seventh fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So this week isn't really the week for me. Back over to the Los Angeles Chargers. Keenan Allen continues to be that volume king. We're starting him every single week. Mike Williams is going to be a start for me, while Jalen Guyton will be a sit. However, last week targets were dispensed 6 to Guyton, 5 to Williams. They're splitting up the deep throws right now. There isn't one guy that's been consistently the deep performer. Both of these guys are getting looks down the field. This is going to be tough to look at the rest of the season because both of these guys are a deep threat right now. They're basically splitting targets behind Keenan Allen, and it could be Williams one week, it could be Guyton the next. And really, there's not going to be a rhyme or reason. It's going to be whoever gets the softest coverage. It's going to be whoever breaks the coverage that 1 or 2 times. It may not be anything that we can figure out. We're just going to have to say that Mike Williams is going to be a little inconsistent down the stretch. For Miami and Denver, Miami, I'm still kind of waiting to see like how this plays out. What I would like to see is somebody really become a consistent wide receiver 2 behind Devontae Parker. However, Preston Williams is out with an injury, and now Jakeem Grant might end up filling that role. I like Jakeem Grant. I brought Jakeem Grant up over the offseason. Didn't expect him to be like a huge fantasy contributor, but there was always a sense if anything were to happen with the wide receivers and he got more of a shot, he could be a guy that could put up some numbers. He's a dynamic player. He's been more on the special team side of the ball and returning punts and kickoffs, but he can play a little wide receiver as well, and we saw that last week. So Devontae Parker will be a start for me this week. Jakeem Grant, Matt Collins are the wide receiver 2 and 3 right now. Maybe Jakeem Grant becomes a start in the future, but as of right now, not something I'm going to bank on. So for Denver, moving over to Denver right now, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, they're going to be starts for me. The ceilings are not really that high with both of these guys, but they're getting a decent amount of volume, and we know the volume is going to them every single time. And they're kind of safe starts. Like if you're just looking for someone to put up points, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, they've really kind of been those guys. So they're not going to be guys that win you any fantasy weeks anytime soon, but they're definitely going to be guys that could keep you from losing fantasy weeks because they're going to give you some points and they're going to do just enough to help you out. There's one point that I consistently try to remind you all of every single week. And a lot of times this season and off season, I've talked about it. You all have to do me a favor and you all have to stop just looking at box scores, okay? Yeah, some of that information can help us out, but some of you are looking at box scores from like last week or the previous week and you're just saying, no, I'm not doing that. Or you're basing your decision solely on that. You can't do that because when you do that, you forget some things. And one of the things that you forget, that Amari Cooper is 7th in targets, 8th in receptions, and 13th in yards this year. A lot of people have moved away from Amari Cooper. And I understand why. There's an issue at the quarterback position right now. But Andy Dalton could end up being back this week, and Andy Dalton has made wide receivers fantasy viable in the past. Garrett Gilbert didn't do too bad a couple of weeks ago. So for those of you that are just passing over Amari Cooper because, hey, I don't like the quarterback situation, take a look at the last couple of weeks. We can't do that because the dude has continued to see volume. He's the number one target in this offense. He's the number one weapon in this offense right now. Yes, over Ezekiel Elliott. And not only that, he only has 2 drops this season. So the inconsistency that people have really been worried about with him over the last couple of years has not been there this year because the dude has been showing up. So yes, I am going to start him again this week. I'm putting him in my lineup, and I'm going to hope that he has some ceiling. But we do know for a fact they're going to have to throw the football, and they're going up against an offense that can give up some points. So CeeDee Lamb will also be a start for me again this week. Amari Cooper will be a start for me this week. And for Minnesota, well, Dallas isn't any good at stopping the pass either. Dallas and Minnesota are 4th and 5th in most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers right now. So this could be a matchup that absolutely just blows the over out of the water. Thielen and Jefferson will both be starts for me this week, and what will be an excellent matchup for them and for the Cowboys. Green Bay and Indianapolis getting together this week. Davante Adams definitely going to be a start for me this week. Why? Right now he's the wide receiver 1 in half PPR formats. He has the most fantasy points this season. We're not talking on a per game basis. Overall for the season, he has the most fantasy points of any wide receiver in only 7 games. Every other wide receiver in the top 12 has 9 or 10 games this season. Davante Adams only has 7. Calvin Ridley, who's the wide receiver 11 right now, has 8. Davante Adams has been an absolute beast. That number right there is insane to know that he has 2 or 3 less games than everybody else in the top 12, and he has the most fantasy points on the season out of all of them. For the wide receiver 2 there, who is it going to be? Allen Lazard? Is he going to be back this week? Is it going to be MVS? This decision this week really relies on Lazard. I'm not going to make a call on the wide receiver 2 being a start or a sit right now. I am going to list him as sits, but later on in the week, if we find out if Lazard will be back, that's when we'll kind of say, okay, yes, we're going with one guy, or we're going to go with the other. But keep in mind, Indianapolis can be tough against the pass. So for the wide receivers over there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sit everybody right now because, again, a major issue so far this season is that Indianapolis spreads the ball around a lot. A lot of guys get targets every single week. The only wide receiver that I am considering is Michael Pittman. But will Jair Alexander and Kevin King be back? That's the number one question right now. I got to know about those 2 guys before I make a definite call on Michael Pittman. If they both end up being out, then Pittman will be a start. If only one of them is out, if Alexander's out again, we'll probably still go ahead and start Pittman. For as of right now, though, he's going to be a sit, but continue to keep an eye on that. And I will try to update you later on in the week, maybe even in the wide receiver rankings video. Maybe he makes an appearance there as a notable player. Kansas City and Las Vegas. And do you think Kansas City is going to try and get some redemption for that loss to Las Vegas earlier in the season? I think so. Tyreek Hill is going to be a start for me. And Sammy Watkins, if for some reason he gets back this week, I am also going to list him as a start. If Sammy Watkins ends up being out, however, I'm going to pivot and go with Mecole Hardman as a start this week. Right now, Hardman is a sit and Watkins is a start. If Watkins doesn't play, then Watkins becomes a sit, obviously, and Mecole Hardman will become a start. No Watkins, going with Hardman. Remember that Las Vegas win last time? You think Kansas City's going to want to get back at them? You think they're going to want to come out here and win this game? Absolutely, because Las Vegas put it to Kansas City last time. And it was really about Las Vegas beating Kansas City deep. Henry Ruggs' best game this season, really his only notable game this season, came in that matchup. Ruggs and Aguilar combined for 185 receiving yards against Kansas City the last time that they played. Expect some of the same thing. Expect it again. Will we see some Josh Jacobs? Absolutely. But I think they're going to target this defense deep. They're going to target this secondary deep. And that bodes well for Ruggs and Aguilar. I'm going to list them both as starts this week because I think Las Vegas, obviously going up against Kansas City, both of these teams are going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. We could see some decent wide receiver performances in this matchup. The Rams and the Bucks on Monday Night Football, and this is going to be a tough matchup for Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, but I'm going to list them both as starts. Just know the ceiling is probably pretty low this week. I did list Josh Reynolds as a start last week, ended up hitting that one. That was a nice one to call last week. We're going to move him back to being a sit this week against a tough Tampa Bay secondary. For me, going over to the wide receivers for Tampa Bay. As of right now, Godwin and Antonio Brown are going to be starts. This is going to be similar to what we see with Pittsburgh the rest of the season. We're probably going to start all three of these guys the rest of the year. However, in this matchup, Mike Evans is going to be getting Jalen Ramsey. Okay? Because of that, I'm going to list Mike Evans as a sit right now. Going up against Jalen Ramsey, there isn't going to be a necessity to force the ball over to Mike Evans like there may have been earlier in the year. Right now with Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, I think we're going to see the ball go to them a little bit more. You could see last week with Antonio Brown, Tom Brady trying to force the ball his way a little bit, wanted to get him into the game plan, wanted to get him rolling, feeling better. You know, when you've got Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown, there's really no reason to force the ball to Mike Evans. That's why I'm going to list him as a sit this week. If he scores a touchdown, that's great, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of volume for him. And then next week, we'll probably go back to starting him more often. There you have it, Headliner Nation. My start and sit matchups for Week 11. Do me a favor, everybody, if you appreciate the content, hit that like button down below. If you got any questions on players, leave a comment as well. And then, as always, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll see you around.